Welcome back. In our last journey, we walked the shores of Ionia with Thales and Anaximenes, watching as the human mind first tried to find the truth of the universe in physical elements like water and air. But today, we move from the coast of Asia Minor to the boot of Italy, and from the realm of the physical to the realm of the invisible. Today, we meet Pythagoras. But here is the problem. Who was Pythagoras? If you open a textbook, you'll see the famous theorem. You'll hear about a man who believed he had been a Trojan hero in a past life. But as Hegel warns us right at the start of his lectures, the Pythagoras we think we know is often a ghost, obscured by centuries of distorted brains and extravagant tales.
Reconstructing the life of Pythagoras is one of the greatest challenges in the history of thought. Hegel is brutal in his assessment of our sources. He notes that the later Neo-Pythagoreans, writing centuries after his death, produced extensive biographies that were less about history and more about distorted statements. These writers lived in the first centuries after Christ, and they wrote the life of Pythagoras in the same style as the Gospels, filling it with miracles, magic, and intercourse with higher beings, to position him as a pagan rival to Jesus. Hegel tells us that everything engendered by Christian melancholy and love of allegory has been forced onto Pythagoras. His philosophy has been treated like a witch's rhyme from Goethe's Faust, where the less clear the thoughts appear, the deeper people assume they are. To find the real Pythagoras, Hegel insists we must strip away the mysterious product of shallow and empty minds and look toward more credible, earlier sources, namely Aristotle and Sextus Empiricus. These men dealt with the theoretic, speculative side of the philosophy before it was buried under the wild ideas of later centuries. As we move forward, we must remember, we have no writings from Pythagoras himself. It is even doubtful if he ever wrote anything at all. What we have are fragments from his followers, and it is in the Pythagorean League that the true spirit of his work lives on. Pythagoras flourished around 540 BC, making him a contemporary of the Ionian thinkers Thales and Anaximander. Born on the island of Samos, he was a child of the same Greek culture of Asia Minor that birthed philosophy. His father was likely an artist or engraver, providing a background of craft and precision that might have influenced his later love for the measure of things. Like many seekers of his time, Pythagoras was a traveler. He spent his youth in the prosperous court of Polycrates, but soon journeyed to Phoenicia and Egypt. Hegel grants significant weight to the Egyptian influence. While he is skeptical of fabulous stories of Pythagoras traveling to India or the Persian magicians, he acknowledges that the Egyptian priesthood left a permanent mark on him. However, Hegel makes a crucial distinction. Pythagoras didn't get profound speculative wisdom from the Egyptian priests. Instead, he got the idea of an order. In Egypt, Pythagoras saw a caste of priests who lived by a special rule, a community dedicated to a moral and scientific culture that spanned their entire lives. When Pythagoras returned to Samos and found the island in political chaos and civil war, he didn't stay to fight. He saw that such strife was unsuitable soil for his plans. He crossed the sea to southern Italy, Magna Graecia, and settled in the town of Crotona. He didn't come as a politician or a warrior. He came as a philosopher. Interestingly, our sources say he was the first to use that word. Before him, men were called sages or wise men, sophos. But Pythagoras called himself a philosophos, one who makes wisdom his object of contemplation. For Pythagoras, philosophy wasn't just a set of ideas. It was a league, a brotherhood, and a way of life that sought to regulate the whole moral life of the individual. The Pythagorean League in Crotona was a monastic order before its time. It was an elaborately designed piece of work aimed at creating a new kind of human being, one who was skillful in business and eminent in morals. But to enter this elite circle, you had to be tested. The biographers tell us that whoever wished to join was scrutinized for their conduct, their inclinations, and their past. Once accepted, you entered a hierarchy. There were the exoteric members, the novices, and the esoteric members, the initiated who were allowed into the highest branches of science. The most famous rule of this novitiate? Silence. For 5 long years, a student was forbidden from speaking, a practice called ecomethea. Hegel, ever the fan of intellectual discipline, finds this rule brilliant. He argues that silence is the essential condition for all culture and learning. In our modern world, we think we learn by questioning and objecting. But Hegel, drawing from the Pythagoreans, suggests that true understanding begins by relinquishing our own ideas and acquiring the power of apprehension. By staying silent, the student realizes that their early objections are often valueless. They cease to have these shallow ideas because they have finally learned to listen to the science of the universal. The life of a Pythagorean was one of total discipline. They wore white linen garments, symbolizing a life set apart from the contingent fashions of the world. Their day was a clockwork of self-examination. In the morning, they recalled the history of the previous day to plan their actions. In the evening, they judged their own deeds to see if they were right or wrong. They practiced gymnastics, wrestling, and racing. They dined together on honey and bread, famously avoiding meat, a diet linked to their belief in the transmigration of souls. And of course, there were the beans. The sources tell us they were forbidden, a rule so strictly followed that some Pythagoreans reportedly preferred to die at the hands of their enemies rather than damage a field of beans during their escape. While we might laugh today, Hegel sees this as part of a moral discipline that sought to make the individual a citizen of a well-regulated state.
But now we must move from the lifestyle to the logic. Hegel tells us that the Pythagorean philosophy represents a massive transition in human history. It is the move from realistic philosophy to intellectual philosophy. Think back to the Ionians. When they asked, "What is the essence of things?" they answered with water or air. These are things you can see and touch. But the Pythagoreans took a bold step. They said, number is the reality of things.
This is a shocking statement. They weren't just saying things can be counted. They were saying that number is the essence, the substance, and the matter of everything that exists. Why number? Hegel explains that number is midway between what is sensuous and thought. Water is purely sensuous. A pure notion is purely thought. But a number? You can see 3 apples, sensuous, but the 3 itself is an invisible, eternal relationship, thought. Hegel uses a wonderful distinction here. Number is thought loosed from its fetters. It is the first time the mind looked at a physical object and said, the truth of this object is not its weight or its color, but its mathematical measure. This is the idealism of Pythagoras, the act of doing away with sensuous existence and making it a creation of thought. However, Hegel also warns that number is the worst possible way to begin thinking. Why? Because numbers are dead and mechanical. In the number 3, for example, each one is independent and indifferent to the others. There is no internal life or necessity in the number 3. It's just 1 plus 1 plus 1. Real thought requires the notion, where opposites relate to and define each other. But Pythagoras was a pioneer, and a pioneer often starts with the most utterly dead tools to build the first structures of the mind.
So, how did the Pythagoreans build the world out of numbers?
It starts with the monad, or unity. The monad is not just the number 1, it is identity. It is the universal essence that makes a thing be like itself. But a world of only ones would be a world where nothing ever happens. For there to be a world, there must be opposition. This is the duad, or the undetermined duality. The duad is the principle of being another, of distinction and multiplicity. Hegel notes that the Pythagoreans were the first to bring these universal and essential differences to consciousness. They even created a famous table of 10 antitheses to categorize all of reality. 1. Limited and unlimited. 2. Odd and even. 3. One and many. 4. Right and left. 5. Male and female. 6. Quiescent and moving. 7. Straight and crooked. 8. Light and darkness. 9. Good and evil. 10. Square and parallelogram. Hegel admits this list is a rude beginning, similar to ancient Indian systems. It's just a collection of general thought determinations thrown together without much order. But it represents the first attempt toward a development of the idea in history. From these opposites, we reach the triad. Hegel calls the triad the first perfect form because it contains a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is the all, the first totality. This is why, Hegel notes, we still find the three so powerful, from the dimensions of space to the Christian Trinity. And then there is the tetrad, which the Pythagoreans perfected into the tetractys. The tetractys is the sum of the first four numbers, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, which equals 10, the perfect number, or the decad. To the Pythagoreans, the decad was the logos of the universe, the source and root of eternal nature. They believed that once you reach 10, you've completed the cycle of numbers and can only start again from the beginning.
But Pythagoras wasn't just playing with abstract symbols. He applied these numbers to the real world, most famously in music. Hegel recounts the legendary story. Pythagoras was passing a blacksmith shop and noticed the hammers hitting the anvils produced different chords. He realized the audible differences were actually mathematically determinable. By measuring the weights of the hammers, or the tension of a string, he discovered the fundamental ratios of harmony: the octave, 1:2 ratio, the fifth, 2:3 ratio, the fourth, 3:4 ratio. This was a world-changing discovery. It meant that feeling, the simple subjective joy of hearing a beautiful note, was actually rooted in a fixed determination of number. Harmony wasn't just an opinion, it was a mathematical law. From music, he moved to space. The point is the monad, 1. The line is the duad, 2. The transition between 2 points. The surface is the triad, 3. The solid body is the tetrad, 4, adding the third dimension. Hegel explains that for the Pythagoreans, what is corporeal is formed under the directing influence of numbers. This led them to the greatest system of the world ever imagined, the music of the spheres. Because 10 was the perfect number, the Pythagoreans insisted there must be 10 spheres moving in the heavens. They identified 9, the fixed stars, the 5 planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, the Sun, the Moon, and the Earth. But that only made 9. So they invented a 10th, the Antichthon, counter-Earth, a body we never see because it's on the other side of the central fire. Wait, a central fire? Yes. Pythagoras did not believe the sun was the center of the universe. Instead, he placed a central fire, the watch place of Jupiter, in the very middle, with the Earth and Sun revolving around it. And here is the beautiful part. As these massive spheres move through space at different speeds and distances, they must produce a sound. Each sphere produces a different tone according to its size and velocity, creating a universal chorus, an eternal harmonious music. Why don't we hear it? The Pythagoreans had a clever answer. We don't hear it because we are always in it. Like a blacksmith who grows deaf to the sound of his own hammer, we have been immersed in the music of the spheres since the moment of our birth. It is identical with our very substance. This brings us to the most controversial part of the Pythagorean tradition, the soul. Following their mathematical logic, some Pythagoreans define the soul as a self-moving number. But the idea that stuck in history was metempsychosis, the transmigration of souls. According to Herodotus, Pythagoras took this idea from the Egyptians. The belief was that the soul is immortal, and when the body dies, the soul enters another living being, moving through animals of the land, sea, and air for a cycle of 3,000 years before returning to a human body. The biographies are full of foolish stories about this. Pythagoras allegedly claimed he could remember his past lives, as the son of Hermes, then as the Trojan hero Euphorbus, then a fisherman. He supposedly proved this by recognizing Euphorbus's moldering shield in a temple.
Hegel is highly critical of this. He calls it an Oriental and un-Greek idea. In the Greek spirit, the individual had grown too free and independent to accept being degraded into the form of a beast. Hegel cites Aristotle's complete refutation of the idea. Aristotle argued that the Pythagoreans acted as if any soul could fit into any body. But that's like saying an architect can take to a flute. Each soul needs a specific tool or body that fits its proper form. For Hegel, the transmigration of souls has no real philosophic interest unless we view it as a glimmering of the idea that the universal permeates all forms. As a literal story of wandering spirits, it is just a miserable imagination.
Finally, we come to practical philosophy. Pythagoras tried to deduce virtue from numbers, but Hegel, following Aristotle, says he didn't do it in the right way. For instance, he defined justice as a square number, a number multiplied by itself, because justice is what remains like itself. Hegel finds this abstract and indeterminate. It's like saying a plant is the number 5 just because it has 5 stamens. It's a purely empty system that doesn't actually explain the reality of the thing. However, we do have the golden words, a collection of moral maxims attributed to the school. They are simple, dignified rules. Honor the immortal gods, honor your parents, and practice self-oblivion by absorbing yourself in the universal. One story summarizes the whole Pythagorean goal. A father once asked a Pythagorean how to best educate his son. The answer was, make him the citizen of a well-regulated state. This was the tragedy of Pythagoras. He wanted to create a moral reality in his brotherhood, but it was an arbitrary existence that wasn't part of the public constitution. In democratic Greece, people were above having particular clothing or special customs of washing and rising. The exclusivity and Eastern separation of the Pythagorean League couldn't survive the Greek principle of civic life. By the end of Pythagoras's life, envy and political suspicion grew. His enemies accused him of having an arrière-pensée, a secret agenda. A popular rising against these aristocrats led to the violent destruction of the League. Pythagoras himself died in the chaos, around 504 BC, though reports of his death vary as much as reports of his life.